Hi, this is Aaron from Sibling Rivalry, and today I'm going to be talking to you about why I sold one of my Kingroon printers.
A machine that can make copies of almost anything.
Well, hello there. Welcome back from the intro. As you may have known from my previous videos, I actually used to own two of these Kingroon printers. I bought the first one back when they were $157 on Amazon.ca, and the second one I actually bought about 3 days later, realizing that it was a really good deal. And I still think that this printer is a really good bang for its buck, but there are some shortcomings with it, and I think that the price increase makes it a little hard to justify these days. I purchased my Kingroon printers back in August of 2019, so that's coming up to, I want to say, 8 or 9 months now that I've had them. I actually just recently sold the second one. I'm not sure which one was the first one that I actually purchased and which one was the second. I kind of lost track of that over the following months. Yeah, I've had them long enough to have a good grasp of the printer and its limitations and what it offers and what it brings to the table for its price point. So I've encountered quite a few problems with my Kingroon printers over the last 8 months, and I'm sure a lot of people on the Facebook groups and the various different support groups for this printer are aware of those problems as well. One of the main problems that I've had, and I believe we've done about 3 videos covering this topic, is the power socket on the printer as well as the power supply. So there is a known issue with this printer, and I don't know if it's an issue with the motherboard or just the power supply or a combination of the two, but it's actually a fire risk. And I had to replace the power connectors on both the male end on the power supply itself and the female end on the Kingroon printer. So I bypassed the onboard power jack, because what was happening is it was arcing, there was melting plastic, there was smoke filling the apartment at random times. It didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to why the connectors weren't mating properly. There was just, they weren't connecting properly, and no matter how much I tried printing the adapter that a lot of people suggested, the little thing to hold it in place. It worked for about 3 weeks, and then I just started having enough problems that I stopped using one of the printers altogether, the one that had the issue more obviously. I tried pretty much everything from like tensioning the cable to I almost bypassed it entirely and just connected the power supply directly to the board, but I realized that that just increases the chance of a fire risk if there's anything wrong with it. Another issue that I've had with this printer over the 8 or 9 months that I've had it is repeatability on this, and I know that that comes down to me doing maintenance and calibrating everything, but I've done a lot of that maintenance and the thing seems to come out of calibration and come out of alignment a little too often for me to use it reliably as a workhorse, and that's why I decided to get rid of, well, that's one of the main reasons I decided to get rid of the second printer. So I tried making quite a few alterations over the past 9 months or so to make this printer work for me. Like I mentioned before, I replaced the power jacks, the male and female. I've added a spool holder on here to kind of condense the size of this and to prevent binding of the filament, because the spool holder that it comes with, it's a little finicky. You have to adjust it every time that you need to switch sizes of spools, and if you're like me, you probably buy filament from a few different suppliers, so the spool widths are different. So I ended up 3D printing this little upgrade. Oop, it just fell apart. That allows me just to set any spool within a certain width on here, and it just works, and I just feed the filament in. I've also had to replace the beds countless times now. I think I've got a whole stack of either fully or partially damaged beds, either from weird issues where the nozzles dug itself into the bed, or the temperature went out of whack and essentially smoothed the surface by melting it slightly. Another upgrade and modification that I've done is change the nozzles on these. So the stock nozzles had a bit of a clogging issue that I noticed after a while, and I swapped them out for some generic ones that I found on Amazon. I've also had to go in and re-lubricate and realign the lead screw, as well as a few other parts on here, and even replace this switch on both of the printers. One of them I was lucky enough to have a direct replacement part. The other one I was not so lucky, and I actually had to improvise using a piece of adhesive vinyl on the y-axis here so that it would trigger the button, because the lever just fell off for no apparent reason. Realistically, this design shouldn't have that issue. Obviously, you can't account for parts when you're literally building for like the lowest possible price, but the design should account for any possible thing here and allow that if this lever isn't on the switch, that the bed can still at least touch that switch without having to make a modification or replace the switch entirely. Yeah, there are a few more upgrades that I'm planning to do down the road, and I kept one of the printers so that I could use it as kind of like an experimentation station, I guess, and try out different things. Another modification that I actually did was I loaded Marlin firmware on it, because the Smoothie derivative that it came with was really limiting. It didn't understand a lot of generic G-code commands or M-codes, and I was having issues with that. If you've seen the filament swap video that I did for the keyboard, you'll notice that I had to load Marlin onto the printer to be able to do the filament swap. It's a pretty standard command, the M600, and the fact that this printer doesn't support that without changing the firmware is kind of a pretty big limiting factor there. So when it came to features that were missing, there was the firmware limitations. While the firmware that it came with by default was pretty quick and it booted fast, it ran, it just ran, there were a lot of limitations with it. You couldn't do active Z offset for like baby stepping, as a lot of people call it, for getting the bed level or the first layer right. The assisted bed leveling feature really wasn't that helpful in my experience. For the price point, I feel that this printer could have come with auto bed leveling, at least in some form, whether that is using a film sensor on the nozzle that you remove, which would be an additional $10 for me to install, or much less for the manufacturer to install. Also, it should have came with a better way to tension these rollers on here. I've noticed that no matter how I tension them, they tend to wear. The filament runout sensor is kind of lacking in a few regards. If you've ever had to do a quick filament swap, you've probably noticed that your filament gets jammed in there, and that is because it doesn't have a liner inside of it. A lot of newer filament runout sensors have a PTFE liner inside of them, which prevents the filament from getting stuck in that. I've actually had to disassemble the sensor on both of the printers multiple times to get filament out after it got jammed in there. And once it's jammed in there, you can't trigger it without disassembling it and removing the filament. So you can't even just ignore the filament runout sensor and just run filament directly into the extruder. You'd have to fix the problem, so to speak, the problem that really shouldn't be there. Another limitation that I found with this is the Bowden extruder. It's a decent Bowden extruder. I have no real complaints about it other than it binds and it doesn't really extrude very well. Like my Artillery has a direct drive extruder. Direct drive is pretty easy to do, especially on this Ender 2/Ender 3 kind of clone, and that's probably something I'll upgrade in the future. So I knew it was time to upgrade and probably get rid of one of the printers when I realized that I couldn't rely on the printer, so to speak, for consistency in any regard. Dimensional accuracy is not a big concern for me a lot of the times, because I'll just account for it in my designs, or if I'm doing something that's more like something that I'm selling on my Etsy store, dimensional accuracy, as long as it's within a certain tolerance, is okay. The problem that I was having was there were random issues with flow and adhesion on the bed, and that was causing all sorts of problems. I was having prints fail. I was having to almost grind the nozzle into the bed to get proper adhesion, which then resulted in further complications down the road. I would have like the bottom layer of my prints peel off because it wasn't adhered to the rest of the print evenly, and that was pretty much the last straw for me. I decided that after I'd had opened the the filament runout sensor and swapped the bed about 7 times. I literally have probably spent like $70 or $80 on replacement beds for this. In hindsight, I probably should have just bought a different bed, but like trying to level this and then it coming unleveled, I'd had enough. Obviously, I'm not giving up on the printer. I can't rely on it for my income right now, which part of my income is from my Etsy business. And if you can't rely on the machine when you need to, then it's time for you to look for other upgrades or different options. See if you can sell the machine, recoup some of your cost, and maybe pay for a more reliable machine or something that at least is not going to have as many issues and weird problems. Another thing I'd like to just go back to is this power supply. It's huge for this printer. The printer doesn't need a power supply this large. You could literally run this thing off of a laptop power supply and it'd be less of a fire hazard. So that was kind of a breaking point for me as well. I constantly had I had to find a place to put the power supplies so that I could run the printers. And it just turned into a whole cable management nightmare, kind of like almost a balancing act of finding places to put them with the printers that would work together and not just have one printer on one side of the apartment and another printer on the other. Yeah, I've essentially benched both of these and I'm just using the Artillery Sidewinder. Yeah, I sold, like I said, one of these to kind of help pay for filament and a more reliable printer. I'd say that about sums up my experiences with the Kingroon to date. I still think it's a good value potential value for what you're getting. I wouldn't necessarily suggest it as a first timer or like a newcomer to 3D printing. I would suggest something a little more reliable. Honestly, from what I've seen, a lot of Creality printers seem to be more reliable. This is essentially a clone of a Creality where they're just scraping the bottom of the barrel. It's not a terrible printer by any means. If you have the patience to work with it and adjust it, you can do some pretty impressive stuff with it. But for the 200 and change that they're charging right now on Amazon.ca, I don't think it's worth it. You can get it from AliExpress for around the $157 that it initially sold for, but that's going to be with slow boat shipping. So that about sums it up for today. If you enjoyed the video or found this informative, please feel free to give us a thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions or concerns, or if you have a similar printer, let us know down below and let us know what you think about the Kingroon. Was it a bad idea for me to sell the other one? I don't think so, but maybe I'm not, maybe from the outside looking in, you'd see something else. If you're not subscribed, feel free to subscribe. We're gonna have regular content updates for the next 2 weeks or so. I know a lot of people are off work or off school from the COVID-19 or coronavirus pandemic. A lot of places are shutting down, so if you need something to keep busy while you're at home doing self-isolation, feel free to look us up. We're going to have all sorts of different content, different stuff every day, and we've got a back catalog of all sorts of different stuff to look at. Other than that, I hope you have a great day, stay safe, wash your hands, and bye for now.